In this tutorial video, we will show you how to use the rental property calculator available at Hauseit.com. If you're not already on the calculator page, you can get here by visiting Hauseit.com. The spelling is at the top. And once you're here, click on Calculators and go to the Buy tab. As you go down on the right side, you will see Rental Property Calculator. There's also a number of other calculators as well. If you're buying a rental property, you might be interested in your buyer closing costs as well. That's critical as you figure out what your return profile will look like. And it may also be helpful for you to look at the mansion tax calculator if you're buying something above $1 million, as well as the mortgage recording tax calculator if you are financing your purchase. Final note as well, the purchase CEMA calculator is pretty interesting. There is an opportunity for you to save some money and reduce the mortgage recording tax if the property has an existing loan on the seller's side and you're able to persuade the seller to assign some of that mortgage to you. And that would reduce the amount of new mortgage you're underwriting, and therefore it would help you save some money on your closing costs. So going back to the rental property calculator, the ultimate purpose of this calculator and the exercise is to help you compute a couple of metrics for investment properties that will help you analyze one particular investment against another. In particular, we are interested in the cap rate because the cap rate is a very common metric used to compare and contrast different real estate investments across cities, across neighborhoods, and across specific opportunities. And it's also interesting to figure out your annual cash flow, as well as possibly your cash on cash return. So if we were to take just a hypothetical example, let's start with a purchase price, say, of $1,250,000. For a closing cost estimate, customarily for a condominium or for a house, assuming you're financing, your buyer closing costs, at least in New York City, are going to be around 4%. So we could either quickly just use the buyer closing cost calculator to compute those, or we could just take an Excel spreadsheet. But in this case, let's quickly digress and go to the buyer closing cost calculator. Let's assume, again, we have a sale price of $1.25 million. And let's say we are financing 50%. So in that case, we'd need to get 50% of 1,250,000, which is 625,000. We'll choose condo here, and as you can see here, the total closing costs are about 40K. Now, they're lower than the 4% we mentioned because we're actually financing a relatively small amount of the purchase price. If we were to finance, say, 80%, which is more common, you would see that the closing costs have gone up, and they'll continue to go up the more that you finance. The reason for that is the mortgage recording tax obviously only applies to the amount of loan that you need. So if you have a smaller loan, you're paying a much smaller mortgage recording tax. So let us take that $40,000 number for closing costs. We'll put that in the rental property calculator, and then we would probably want to figure some sort of monthly rental income. You know, if you're buying a condominium like this in Lower Manhattan, it's probably a very small 2-bedroom. If that, it's probably more likely to be a 1-bedroom apartment. So, you know, we could take a monthly rental income, say, of $5,500, hypothetically. And for our interest rate, put something like 5%. Now our next step would be to input a mortgage loan amount. So if we were to finance half of the purchase, we would therefore have a loan of $625,000. As far as property taxes and common charges are concerned, we can go ahead and just estimate and say that each one is $750 a month. Now these are annual fields, so in order to calculate the annual property taxes and common charges, we would just multiply 12 by 750, giving us 9,000 a year. So we would put 9,000 under property taxes, as well as 9,000 under common charges. As you can see here, we've already calculated a preliminary cap rate, cash flow, and cash on cash return. A couple other things though we do want to think about in no particular order. The vacancy rate is important because up to this point, our entire calculation has assumed that during the course of a normal year, there would never be any vacancy. And even in a city like New York, where you have limited housing stock and very strong demand, it is possible from time to time, maybe every year or every other year, you have a few weeks or a month and a half or 2 months of vacancy. That being said, for this example, we can possibly assume that an apartment is going to be vacant for 1 month out of every 12. Ideally, it's much lower than that in New York City, but let's consider this a semi-conservative assumption. So 1 month out of 12 is 8.33%. So if we were to go back in the calculator and we were to input an 8% vacancy rate, that would give us some degree of cushion for the possibility of our investment being vacant. Now, as far as property management fee is concerned, this is definitely something optional. So if you are in your city where you're investing and you want to be semi-active or fully active, you probably don't need a property manager. So you could put 0 here. But if you're out of state, you need somebody to take care of things for you, to let in the plumber, let in the super, things like that, deal with the tenant, you may want to budget something for a property management fee. So we could put in a very low estimate, possibly 5% per year. That would be 5% of your monthly rental income that you would pay the property manager. So at this point, we've essentially filled in everything here with the exception of homeowner insurance, maintenance, as well as the cost of any renovation. For your typical apartment, a homeowner's insurance premium is going to be $1,000 to $2,000 a year. The same would be the case for So for homeowner's insurance premium, let's put in $1,000. And keep in mind, it could be a little higher if you're buying a mixed-use property, multifamily, a more expensive home, townhouse, or apartment. You can find out an estimate, a more accurate estimate, by using an online quote generator. There's a ton of them out there. Feel free to take a look. So if we add the homeowner's insurance premium, it is going to further lower our return-related metrics because it is another cost that we do have to incur. Now, as far as maintenance and repairs, you certainly do want to input something here because it is unrealistic to have a real estate investment that doesn't require upkeep over time. So we've put $5,000, which may be a little high for a property like this, but if you annualize or basically prorate large capital projects over time, such as replacing your windows, replacing the HVAC unit, it may very well be the case that you pay about $5,000 a year for a property that's just over $1 million. Finally, if we want to include a cost of renovation in this investment, we can go ahead and do so. And as you can see, adding something to renovation costs will lower the cap rate and it will depress many of our metrics. So our cap rate is currently 2.59%. If we do a $50,000 renovation, our cap rate goes down to 2.49%. So a little bit about cap rates. This cap rate here is relatively low, although in New York City, where cap rates are low in general, it's not the end of the world. If you were in another city, a less vibrant city economically speaking, this cap rate would be almost a joke. It would be way too low for it to be worthwhile. So in New York City, cap rates on the higher end are going to be maximum 3.5–4% for your typical apartment, residential apartment in the city. You certainly can get higher if you go into further out neighborhoods. Bed-Stuy, Crown Heights might be a nice hybrid between the low risk type investment qualities of something in Manhattan plus a little bit of upside. If you were to go into further out into Queens, the Bronx, you certainly can find a higher cap rate, but in theory it is proportionate with the increased risk and possible higher vacancies and other additional risks associated with being in an area that is essentially less economically vibrant. That being said, you can play around with the calculator to see if your investment is worthwhile. And you can also compare investment 1 against investment 2 using these various metrics as your variables. So if we were to say, for example, instead of this property, which gave us a 2.5% cap rate, we did a purchase that was $800,000, and somehow the monthly rental was only a little bit less. Let's say it was $4,900. And let's say that this property was already renovated and our closing costs were lower. Let's say our closing costs were only $20,000. And again, we can just double check here what they might be. Assuming we're financing 50%, it looks like our closing costs are going to be $20K. So in here we would put $20K for the closing costs, and we would also want to lower the mortgage loan amount to our new figure of $400. We probably want to lower the property taxes because it's a smaller property, less expensive. Same goes with the common charges. HOA premium we can keep the same, and maybe the maintenance and repairs we lower it to $3,500. So in this case, as you can see, we've actually come up with a much higher cap rate. This would actually be a very good investment, especially in Manhattan. This would be a very appealing opportunity relative to what's out there in the city. But just to reemphasize, if you were in another city, Detroit, for example, if you were in Detroit, a cap rate should be probably double this at a minimum to make it worth your time. If you have any questions, leave us a comment below the video, and don't forget to check out the buyer closing cost calculator, as well as a number of other calculators here that might be of interest. If you're still renting your primary home, you can also compute net effective rent, which helps you understand the relative attractiveness of any landlord incentives, such as a free month, and contextualize it based on the advertised rent amounts. Let us know if you have any questions. Again, leave us a comment, send us an email, give us a call. We'd love to hear from you.